Hey folks, Alan from Important Fun here. This week wanted to talk about how I build a campaign through what I'm calling goals and obstacles. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways to build a campaign for Dungeons and Dragons or any other role-playing game. Everything from story building to very sandbox or just a straight dungeon hex crawl. I prefer a story-based campaign with the players actually driving most of the action. I don't like to write out ahead of time a whole campaign or even use an off-the-shelf campaign story because I just find it's a little limiting, and I like to give the players that agency. It also takes some of the work off my plate. So here's how I go about sort of running the game. First step is finding a goal. And what I mean by a goal is sort of a unified motivation for the entire party. So usually what happens in your first session, whether that's like a first actual play session or a sort of like planning get together, is that you'll end up with 4 or 5 characters, each with their own goals and motivations that don't necessarily line up. If you have like new players or players who aren't into the more like role-playing aspects of the game, they might not have even any motivations really planned out for your character. And so I think a big responsibility for the Dungeon Master, kind of regardless, but especially if you're going to run this sort of campaign, is to both help the players come up with their individual character motivations, but then also figure out a way to give them a goal that combines all of these motivations. So for instance, in a campaign that I'm running right now, when we started out, we had 5 characters with a few related goals, but a few sort of like kind of scattered. And so I went with what is one of the like sort of simplest and easiest and go-to for a reason goals, which is to create an antagonist that is sort of the problem that embodies the same sort of problems that each character are trying to solve, and then by combining all of that into one NPC, it gives them a clear goal of like, look, we all want to get rid of this. So in this case, I had a local lord who was kidnapping people and then using them for these cruel experiments that are crimes against nature, and that got all the characters on board. The goal doesn't necessarily have to be a single antagonist, though. Obviously, Lord of the Rings is a great example of a sort of D&D party where their goal is bringing an artifact from point A to point B and getting rid of it. I always think of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a very good example of kind of a D&D party type setting, and in that they're more staying in one place and defending a town, dealing with problems as they arise. So that's their goal. The next thing you need to do once you've got a goal for the party is set the pace. And this is similar to what like a director or editor may do on a film, or a writer writing a novel. You want to set the pace of the story. So obviously, if they've got this goal to defeat an antagonist, in theory, I could put that antagonist, make it available in like the first or second session, and maybe they defeat them, maybe they don't, but that like kind of can suck the storytelling pace out of it. You might want to stretch things out a little bit. For this, for instance, I usually plan on, for this antagonist, I want to do like a whole campaign arc based around killing this one guy or getting rid of him. And so for that, I'm going to try and, massage things with obstacles so that he's not defeated until the 10th session. I try and make it so that the players still accomplish something at the end of every session. So they get, a minor accomplishment and then slightly larger accomplishment on the sessions that end in a level up. This is how I kind of break the overall story arc into like smaller chapters that kind of have this rising sort of threat level, and then things sort of balance back out, and then it starts to, we do a few more accomplishments, we get closer and closer, we have a major accomplishment, and then things kind of reset. So what do I mean by obstacle? Well, it's probably the stuff that most people are already doing in Dungeons and Dragons. You're saying, oh, to defeat this, this lord, you might need this magic sword. Did not mean for that to rhyme. But where do we find the magic sword? Oh, nobody knows. Well, maybe this guy over here knows, and so we have to go on this adventure over to far off land to talk to the sage or, magic dragon or whatever to find out where the sword is so that we can kill the guy. It's sort of a old lady who swallowed a fly type scenario. And basically each one of those things that you're choosing to throw in the party's way is an obstacle. And those obstacles are gradually making it so that eventually when they do accomplish their goal, whether that's 10th session or whenever, it's going to feel like they accomplished something instead of like, okay, we killed that guy, what's next? Now, one of the things that I recommend with this is not to plan the obstacles too far in advance. I usually won't do more than 2 or 3 sessions at the most as far as like what I'm even beginning to plan out. As I said sort of at the start of this, I try and make this as player driven as possible. And so what I'll do is, I'll sort of throw something at the players to kind of occupy them for a bit, and then when they're done, be like, okay, what do you guys want to do next? Where do you want to go next? And see if they a lot of times will come up with some ideas themselves that might be better than anything you would have come up with, that will let you know where to take the story. Of course, things won't go simple for them. If they say, oh, we want to go to this guy's castle and kill him, I would say, okay, you can definitely do that, but then who knows what's going to happen? Maybe they go through the castle and it's tougher than they imagined, or maybe they go through and it's actually, pretty manageable for them, a pretty balanced encounter, but then they get to the end and it's like, sorry, princess is in another castle. And so that way you're, again, setting the pace of things. So for an example, because I think this might be easier to explain through showing how I did this current campaign, I'm just going to go through and sort of talk about what I did session by session. So first session, like I said, we made the characters. I kind of started to get an idea for an antagonist that they could face, but I wasn't ready to really throw that in yet. So I had 3 adventures sort of pre-made, that I was going to run one of regardless of what kind of characters the players made. And I had one where they were captured by pirates that was like, I bet I can segue this pretty easily into this story that it seems like is brewing. So I ran that, and then it ended with them at an island, which I thought, oh, maybe this is where the evil Baron is having his, crazy experiments run. So like maybe they'll want to explore this, but they also had a ship. So I asked them, where do you want to go next? Do you want to go back to town? Do you want to explore this island? Do you want to just go exploring the high seas? Like they might have done that, and I've been like, okay, maybe this Baron thing isn't going to work out. I'm going to have to find another goal for them to do. But they wanted to do the island. So I went home and I started doing a little bit of planning, and I decided, okay, it sounds like their goal is to sort of figure out what's going on, why they were captured, and whether this island has something to do with it. And so I was like, that seems like a kind of 2-session goal. This will be a fairly major accomplishment once they're done with it. So I took the island, divided up into sort of like 2 parts. I was like, we can probably do 1 session of exploring the island kind of the wilderness of the island and dealing with native inhabitants as well as guards for this research facility. And then a second part that'll be breaking into exploring the research facility and figuring out exactly what's going on. And so that's what we did. Worked out really well. And then after that session, it was like, what do you want to do next? And so the players went back to town. They took their actually they had to get a second ship. The first ship, the remaining pirates stole it back in the night, and who knows where they are. But the players made it back to sort of the central town, and I obviously still wasn't ready for them to face the antagonist head on. So I threw an obstacle. I said, turns out this lord is, off conquering nearby towns, and he's surrounded with a, huge army. So I don't know. I've said, you guys can go over and try and, chase it if you want, but it's going to be tough. I also gave them a little adventure hook of, there's a resistance movement in town. And, it just so happened that the players ran into them and were offered to join up. And they went along with that, which was really easy for me. It meant that I had a few sessions to kind of throw some missions at them, and worked really well. I decided that I wanted to do like working with the resistance as sort of a 3-session middle chapter of this story. And then in the 6th session, I threw an obstacle that they didn't really know about. I actually led them into thinking that they would have the opportunity to try and defeat the antagonist, but really it was false information planted by a spy within the resistance. And so that session, instead of ending with a major accomplishment, actually kind of ended with a major setback, where the resistance movement had been like defeated and scattered, and the players were back on their own. This was a very open-ended point where I actually I can't remember if I straight up forgot to ask them what they wanted to do next, or if they just weren't sure, but it left me with not much to plan for the next session. So the 7th session, I actually had to kind of run very on the fly, improvised at the table, but they ended up deciding to go to a town that the evil Baron was laying siege to, and then see if they could sneak past the Baron's army, past the defenders, and get into the town to try and get them as allies. And so I was like, okay, that can work well. So I made, a dungeon of them going through a mine, or a cavern into a mine, and that was sessions 8 and 9, and then they can meet with the people in the town and decide how they're going to defeat the Baron, because now we're up on session 10, and this hasn't happened yet, so I'm not sure what their plans are to defeat the Baron, but this is about how long I wanted this story arc to last. So now it's time to actually have that climax, and it's come at a time that really makes sense, because we've got this sort of final showdown with his army around this town, sort of do or die, and so it's worked out perfectly. And this is generally how things work with this, I've found, where you let the players sort of decide how they want to weave the story around, and you just keep building things up and up and stretching it out until a point where it sort of reaches its breaking point, and you're like, okay, let's finally do this, and give them the opportunity to try and defeat this antagonist. So, again, to sort of recap step by step, first step is to work with the players and work with what they've given you as far as their character motivations to find a unified goal for the party. Then you're going to decide the scope of the goal, whether we want to run this for a couple levels, 3 or 4 levels. You don't want to stretch things too far, both because it might get old, and also D&D, power level of the players advances so quickly that at a certain point it's going to be like, wait, we're 10th level and you're saying we're still chasing this, local warlord baron around? That doesn't make any sense. Once you've got the scope of the goal kind of figured out, start throwing obstacles in their way. Again, not really planning out too far in advance, just enough to get you through the next session or two, and always asking the players what they want to do next so that it's driven by the players, not by you. And you just keep repeating that until you reach the point where you're just like, okay, here's where I want this story arc to end. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how I do my campaign planning, such as it is, through goals and obstacles. I'm going to have a blog post about this coming out tomorrow. If you want to kind of read and hope maybe that might make sense if the sort of random incoherence of this did not, you can check that out at importantfun.com/blog. Feel free to leave any comments if you have any questions, or you can find me on Twitter, also at importantfun. Thanks for watching.